Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Middle East Monitor podcast. My name is Mohammed Hussein, and today we are talking to Sangar Paykhar. He is an Afghan expert from Kabul originally. He lives in the Netherlands, and he is part of the Afghan Eye media outlets. Now, we will be talking about Afghanistan and the recent developments there, and what's going on in the region and what is the international view of it. So first of all, just to get like a bit of a background, at the end of August, the US will be fully withdrawing its forces, or that's what they say. Now, there's been a lot of speculation of whether that's going to be happening or not. Because there's always going to be, they say, advisors. There's always going to be some sort of presence or CIA presence. Do you think they'll fully withdraw, or do you think it's just words, it's just rhetoric? What's your view on that?
Well, Mohammed, first of all, thank you very much for having me. The agreement between the United States and Taliban has to be understood as something that is a necessity for the United States. Okay, the United States cannot afford to keep troops in Afghanistan, and even though the departure of foreign forces may lead to undesirable circumstances in Afghanistan, they have made the decision to withdraw fully. So I don't think that there will be any residuals staying behind in Afghanistan. Yes, the United States will continue to support the government of Afghanistan militarily. They will supply arms. They will also provide training for Afghan forces. That will be most likely in Qatar and other countries. And as you may have heard in the last few days, there were many bombardments in southern Afghanistan, in Kandahar and Helmand. And those airstrikes were carried out by the Americans. And those airplanes did not take off from Afghan soil, because there are no places in Afghanistan where there are B-52s stationed. So those airplanes that carried out the airstrikes were American B-52s, and they took off from another country, maybe Qatar, maybe some other country in the region. So this reveals that even though they have withdrawn most of their troops and most of their weapons out of Afghanistan already, by August, they won't have anyone left in Kabul, but they do have the capability of striking whenever they want, because they have air superiority, and they have shown that already in the last few days.
So, so they're going to be continuing to support Kabul in the.
Yes, definitely. That's what they have said repeatedly in most recent statements by the State Department, and more recently, American generals visited Afghanistan. They have always reassured the government in Afghanistan that even though they are leaving and they are taking all their forces out of Afghanistan, they will continue to support the government. And what they have shown in the last few days with the airstrikes carried out in Kandahar and Helmand is that they still have the capability to do so, even though they have no troops in Afghanistan. And may I remind you, before the Americans invaded Afghanistan in 2001, there were airstrikes carried out in Afghanistan in 1998 in Khost as a retaliation against the bombing of American embassy in Cairo. So in Kenya, yes. So you see, that's what the United States was capable of before invading Afghanistan, and they will remain this capability even after withdrawing fully out of Afghanistan.
Now, of course, this comes at a backdrop of the recent gains made by the Taliban. They've taken over many dozens of districts, hundreds of districts in recent weeks and months. And they say, or they claim that they've taken over 85% of the country. Now, I'm going to jump straight into it. What's your opinion on their chances of victory? Do you think that they will, as many people say they would, take over Kabul after the Americans leave in the next few months or by the end of this year? Do you see that?
The Taliban strategy right now, as it is apparent, is that they want to increase their leverage in negotiations with the Afghan government. And for that, they need to control vital institutions such as trade ports connecting Afghanistan with Pakistan, Iran, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan. Because Afghanistan is a landlocked country, Afghanistan doesn't produce much. It is entirely dependent on aid and imports. And for that reason, the Taliban are trying to take over vital routes connecting Afghanistan to neighboring countries. And by doing so, they are trying to basically take the Kabul regime in a chokehold. So those 150 districts approximately, they win. They take over a district, and another district is then taken over by the government again. But it's approximately about 150 districts that they have taken over recently. Those districts are all situated in areas that are very important for Taliban in order to exert pressure on the government in Kabul. Because the Taliban as a movement, what they are trying to achieve is gain the maximum leverage against the regime in Kabul. And by doing that, they want to have a negotiation, a settlement, which suits them well. And the sad thing about this whole situation is that as a result of taking all those districts, thousands of people have been displaced from many areas in Afghanistan. Like, for instance, there are thousands of people in Kandahar displaced from some districts. They live in this hot summer in Kandahar without shelter, without food and water. And the same thing applies to Kunduz and Baghlan provinces in the north. A lot of people have been displaced. But yes, this is what the Taliban are trying to do, is force the government to reach a settlement that is what Taliban are trying to achieve. Now, you asked about taking over Kabul. I would say that that would be very foolish, and I don't think that the Taliban are trying to take major cities like Kabul, Jalalabad, Herat, or Kandahar, because in those cities, most of the power, most of the military power of the government are concentrated in those big cities. So trying to take over a city would result into a bloody mess. I would expect that thousands of civilians would die, and Taliban are trying to achieve some sort of legitimacy as a movement. International acceptance is what they want to achieve. And let's say if they would really go and try to take a city resulting into thousands of civilian casualties, they will lose some credibility and some international recognition that they have acquired recently. So strategically, that doesn't make any sense. And this is why I don't think that they will do that in foreseeable future. However, they do try to take full control of ports where goods, services, food, fuel, also medication, all those things are important in Afghanistan, either via Pakistan, via Iran, via Turkmenistan, or via Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. So trying to take over those ports is already creating a situation for the Taliban so that they can really pressure Kabul. And I think that's what's happening right now in front of our eyes. And I have no idea how will this eventually evolve, but that seems to be their current strategy.
So yeah, so like you said, it's a huge gamble. So if they do stick to the rural areas, leaving the big cities to the governments, and if there is actually a negotiation between the government and the Taliban, and if there is a sort of joint government, or even if they do take over, you know, whichever situation there is, how do you think the international community will react to the Taliban after 20 years? You know, after 20 years of them being ousted from Kabul and and with the coalition having ousted them, do you think that the international community and other countries will accept them? Or yeah, because there's been some news recently, some reports that Russia is trying to build relations with the Taliban. So yeah, do you think that's going to happen, or will they just outright reject them?
There is some development in the region. So we know that Pakistan always maintained a good relationship with the Taliban. Iran has also maintained relationship with the Taliban. And what has changed is that in the last 20 years, Western countries occupied Afghanistan and tried to create a regime that is functional. But that attempt has been that has been a total failure. Like it's a waste of resources and money. And the people who are in power in Kabul, they are extremely disunited. They cannot cooperate, and they cannot manage to create a functioning government, which creates instability in the region. And the United States is not able to stay for another 20 years, hoping that these parties in Afghanistan can finally sort out their own internal differences and create a functioning government, because the United States and the allies simply don't have the resources. And meanwhile, the regional countries, Russia, Iran, China, they also don't want to have all these American bases in their backyard. So there is a consensus in the region, plus with the United States, that this situation needs to end. There needs to be some sort of settlement that is functional for everyone. Now, saying that, what it means is that the willingness to cooperate with the Taliban has arrived as a result of failures of the last 20 years. You see, in the international relations, we hear about human rights and all sorts of conventions. Those things are always a matter to, talk about. But when it comes to the interests of each and every country, those matters are not really relevant. And this is why you see that regional countries are inviting the Taliban. They are having open relationships with them as if they are a legitimate part of Afghan government or establishment. And that's a necessity. They feel a necessity because they have realized that in the last 20 years, they couldn't achieve anything with the current sitting government in Afghanistan. They can't have trade agreements because everything is derailed due to corruption and internal infighting. They cannot make any sort of security agreements because the current government does not show any willingness to make peace with the Taliban. So there is a situation where everybody feels like they have no other choice but to sit around the table and talk to the Taliban, because they say, okay, the other guys, they are obviously not capable of doing what they're supposed to do as governors, rulers of their own country. So this is why I think that not just United States, Russia, and China, but also Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Iran, all these countries, they see like they have no other choice. Now, does that mean that the Taliban will totally take over Afghanistan and they will establish their emirate just like they did 25 years ago? I don't know. I don't know. That's the honest opinion. People say all sorts of things, but I don't see that happening right now. And I also think that that's the biggest issue that is very vague. Both sides are being very vague, and they are hiding what they are actually talking about behind closed doors when they have negotiations. So we don't know what is going to happen eventually. What we do know is that the Taliban will, in any way, they will have the upper hand. And that's simply because they are an insurgent movement, and any insurgency is always capable of being very united and very goal-oriented, while the government, all the various political factions and various parties, they are not so capable of being very clear-headed and focused and goal-oriented. So that's why I think the Taliban have the upper hand.
And with regards to the neighboring countries, Pakistan, Iran, etc., and do you think, or who do you think will have the most role to play in the near future? Because we've seen over the past year, Iran has the Iranian foreign minister has allegedly or reportedly offered its militias to have a role in protecting the Afghan governments, and Turkey obviously has offered to guard Kabul's airports, which the Americans reportedly accepted. And obviously Pakistan has long been an influencer in the region and in Afghanistan, which is sees as its backyard. So who do you think will have the most role to play in the near future? Are they competing for influence there?
The reason why Turkey is involved is because Turkey is part of NATO, and as part of NATO, they have given Turkey this role to take over certain responsibilities because of cultural, religious, historic ties with Afghanistan. But I think that the role of Turkey in the future of Afghanistan will be minimal. Other countries that will have a very significant role, primarily it's going to be Pakistan. And that's because Afghanistan shares the largest part of its border, which is actually not recognized by us Afghans as border. It's referred to as the Durand Line. We share that line with Pakistan, and Pakistan is also the shortest access route for Afghanistan to the sea. So everything eventually revolves around economy. So economically, Afghanistan is bound to be always tied to Pakistan. And for that reason, Pakistan will always have a very important role in Afghanistan. And plus, because Taliban as a movement, they have always had a very close relationship with Pakistan. But this relationship, after full withdrawal of US troops, is entering a new phase. And that new phase is that the Taliban are trying to create an Islamic emirate in Afghanistan, something that many Islamist groups in Pakistan also aspire to achieve. And we have Tehreek al-Labbaik Pakistan is a movement in Pakistan. They're opposed to the government. We have the TTP. And aside from TTP and TLP, there are many other very conservative political organizations and parties in Pakistan. And those groups, they will see creation of a possible Islamic Emirate in Afghanistan as a model to emulate in Pakistan. And this is why the relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan is currently at a crossroad. It may even deteriorate. The relationship between Taliban and Pakistan may even deteriorate as a result of that. So it's not really 100% clear right now what will happen between the two countries, because we don't know the eventual outcome. We cannot predict what the future government of Afghanistan is going to be. But suppose it is an Islamic Emirate and the Taliban take over, then the military establishment in Pakistan, political parties, the whole democratic system, they are very concerned because they don't want to see an Islamic Emirate next door with all these thousands of Pakistanis who actually see that as a ideal form of governance. So that's the relationship between Taliban and the possible future government of Afghanistan and Pakistan. You talked about Iran. The thing with Iran is that on the one hand, Iran has a strategy in Middle East, which is often called the Shia Crescent. Iran has an expansionist strategy, expansionist foreign policy. They're trying to expand their role in the Middle East, and they're doing so by playing all sides. Like, for instance, in Iraq, we saw that during the US invasion, Iran supported the Americans, but also provided logistical support to Al-Qaeda to establish Islamic State of Iraq. But they also supported the Shia groups. So Iran has a very complex strategy. They play all sides to eventually gain the most leverage against other players in the region. Now, they're doing the exactly same thing in Afghanistan. On the one hand, they provide support for the Taliban. On the other hand, they have the Fatimiyun militia in their back pocket in case they need to deploy them in Afghanistan. They're also playing different political entities in Afghanistan, and they also maintain a very good relationship with the government in Afghanistan. And that's because Iran wants to have as much political influence in Afghanistan as possible, because Iran also, not because just they want to expand their influence just like in the Middle East, Iran also depends from water in Afghanistan. All the water that irrigates agriculture and industry in Iran comes from Afghanistan, and Iran is currently suffering from drought. And that's why they want to make sure that any future government in Afghanistan is favorable towards Iran, so that they can continue getting the water that they need for their agriculture and industry. So it's a very complicated relationship that Taliban have with Iran, and the sort of game Iran is playing in Afghanistan, because the end goal is to have maximum control over Afghanistan, just like they have right now in Iraq, and just like they have similarly to a certain extent in Syria and in Lebanon. And this is very concerning, because the interest of Iran in Afghanistan is to have some sort of chaos so that they can reap the benefits of that. And for that reason, I would say that any future government in Afghanistan that is favorable for Iran would not necessarily be beneficial for us Afghans.
Now, just one last question. You've mentioned your previous works and your previous articles and your social media. You've mentioned before the Kabul bubble. You know, the bubble of I assume the elites, their families, their interests, and Western commentators. Can you tell us a bit about that? Can you enlighten it for us, especially for those who don't know much about Afghanistan?
Well, Afghanistan is, for a large part, a country that is still rural and it's agricultural. Most people in Afghanistan are very poor. Illiteracy is very high. However, what has happened in the last 5 decades is that a minority of Afghans have obtained some level of education. They have had the opportunity to travel abroad, to study in Western countries, and they worked for international organizations. And these people are the nouveau riche of our society. They have benefited, especially in the last 2 decades, from occupation of Afghanistan. And there is sadly an industry created in Afghanistan where the education sector and all these human rights activists and all of them, they have total dependency from foreign occupation and donations from Western embassies, Western NGOs. And these people, they have amassed a lot of wealth, power, status, and prestige in Afghanistan, which is not an ideal situation. You don't want to have a country where the elite is entirely dependent on occupation and entirely dependent on donations. They will never really try to develop the country. They will never really try to make Afghanistan economically, financially, but also intellectually an independent nation. And when I sometimes refer to people as Kabul bubble, what I try to describe is people who are detached from the rest of the country because they pursue other interests than the vast majority of the people. Like everyone in Afghanistan wants peace. It's not like vast majority of the people are pro-Taliban or vast majority of people are pro-government. Vast majority of people in Afghanistan couldn't care less about either side. They just want to live in peace and prosperity. But the sad thing is that neither the government nor the Taliban are capable of providing that. So it's on individual basis. Every Afghan always thinks about what is most beneficial for them as an individual. And you see that many people have benefited from foreign occupation, and that's seen as this is support for the republic, this is support for the government. But that's not so. Those people didn't have any choice. And this is why I think that the most issues arise from social, political tensions and differences.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end. Thank you very much. It's been a huge insight, and I look forward to seeing your work more. And thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Bye.